Folks, welcome back. This is Chris Temple, editor and publisher of the National Investor and also the MC for the upcoming Strategic Investment Insights Conference, not many days hence, the 6th and 7th of May at the Lincolnshire Marriott outside of Chicago. And I've been there for quite a while, quite a number of years. I've had the privilege of being with Rich and Eric Rudez. We've rebranded the show somewhat, as some of you already know. But one of the other old hands, but more so than me, in his tenure with Rich and Eric at the former Chicago Resource and Technology Expo is my good friend, Dr. Lee Warren. Lee, I'm glad you could take a few minutes today and visit.
Well, thank you. And I'm always welcome, ready to receive any type of invitation. And I've been knowing Rich for, I guess, pretty close to over 10 years.
Yeah.
More.
Been a while. You know, you live in the Chicago area, so you've been around the conference for a while. And one of the things I've always appreciated learning from you, and we had this conversation with Connie Harrison. I didn't know if you knew Clyde's daughter was going to be coming to the show, but Connie Harrison is going to be there. But anyway, she and I were talking a few days ago. What you also, but like her, bring to the table is not just data points about the markets and strategies and things like that, but you bring a human element to things, and you bring, I think, an important spiritual element to things, because you know as well as I do, or better, Lee, that things today, as crazy as the world is getting, are overwhelming, and you've got to be able to keep things in a proper perspective, don't you?
That's correct. We live in such cuckoo times, and then first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me, but we're living in such cuckoo times, and in these situations, you usually come up with a lot of cuckoo theories. You try to deal with the situation that we're currently in, and the only thing that you have, I guess, if we want to go back in history and look at get some type of anecdotal evidence, or to be able to frame this argument, would to be able to go back to 1979 when Volcker was appointed Fed chief, and what he had to deal with was inflation. That'll give you an idea of how the Fed Powell is going to deal with it. And I don't think they have any idea with inflation the way it's running, that what they have to do, they're going to have to put this country in really some serious a recession to really kind of knock this thing down. I mean, you can't do it just cozy. I mean, to give you some simple statistics that people are not familiar with. It's not just simple things that at least you'll be able to frame the argument. Well, when he's appointed in 79, in 1980, inflation rate was running about 14, just say 15%.
Right.
And the Fed fund rate, Volcker was one that was, should I say, I've been looking for the words to describe it. He was one hell of a fighter for inflation, and he wouldn't let anybody determine him from getting this inflation rate down, because he knew the consequences of where it would wind up at. And what we did then is that he raised, if Fed funds went to 20%, that was in the early 1980s. Now it took 2 years, about October or somewhere around the end of 1982, he got inflation down to about 9%. But look what he had to do. He had to jack the Fed rate to 20%. And did you know what the Fed fund, the treasury, the 10-year treasury bond was? It was 15%. Can you imagine? Right. 15%? And to have a context, we had less than $1 trillion debt, less than $1 trillion. Now we're dealing with what, $30 trillion in debt? Yep. So we're in a situation that is unparalleled in comparison to what Volcker had to deal with. And it took him 2 years to knock it down. And he didn't have the problems that we had with supply shortages and the sanctions that were placed on Russia. So this is going to be a yeoman's job and a lot of pain coming forth to try to get this thing under control. And with the amount of debt that we have, it's something that Wall Street has not informed the folks of how serious it is. And we're running what, 8.5 CPI.
That's what they tell us.
That's what they tell us. But
Right.
Dr. Williams
Meanwhile,
said it's 16%.
yeah. Meanwhile, you'll get it. Meanwhile, my box of wheat thins has gone from 12 ounces to 10 ounces to the last couple of trips to the grocery store, 8.5 ounces. That's my box of wheat thins. Generally for the same money. But Lee, look, we're going to talk about a whole lot of stuff at the show. We're going to talk about how, first being an arsonist by printing all this money. Now Jerome Powell started out, he's going to be tough and use a water pistol. Now he's maybe next week going to graduate right before the conference to a super soaker. Still not enough to put out a 5-alarm fire. But you made a good point with these supply chains and things like that, because what's going to complicate the inflation fighting effort is not just reining in monetary policy, and they're limited as to how much they can do, obviously, because we have so much debt, but we have global trends that are underway that are now becoming irreversible, away from globalization, away from global supply chains, away from cheapest is best, to now we're going to rebuild supply chains as we can, based on national security, based on regional security, based on avoiding long distance carbon taxes for transporting things, and all of those things. And especially where resources are concerned, and I know you like to follow natural resources too, we have chronic underdevelopment going back years of just about everything. I mean, at the conference, we're going to be talking about base metals, precious metals, uranium, oil and gas, helium even, and across the board. Not nearly enough development for the world's still large needs for these things. And so, I think for the average person, they need some guidance as to how to process this mentally and spiritually, really. And that's what you bring to the table. Of course, I love your organization. It's always, to me, been one of the catchier names I've ever heard of. P.L.I.M, Power Latent in Man.
Well, that's the power you're going to need to deal with this situation.
Right.
And it's not like you say, you're not going to be able to deal with this thing with a water pistol. And the politics have to be put to the side, because we're dealing with a national crisis, if not a worldwide crisis on this situation. And it's going to take a yeoman's job to get this thing under control. And the politicians are trying to push green without looking at the infrastructure. They wrote a bill, looked like nobody done any type of research and said, wait a minute, what type of resources do we need, as you pointed out? Base metals, can we get this thing up and running in the next 3 to 5 years, full blown? And you find, so wait a minute, y'all look at the silver, base metals, the copper, none of this stuff is available to deal, because they all with a deficit as far as trying to handle what you are trying to do. Right.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy job. What kind of, I know you have local meetings in the Chicago area. You've got a circle of friends and followers there, if you will, who you minister to, really. And what are you telling folks these days as far as how to
deal with? We tell them what's the 3 planes. So we're dealing on a physical plane, a psychological, and spiritual plane.
Okay.
There are things that you need to do, first of all, with your assets, anything that you have. We realize that things are not normal. You're going to have some certain type of supply shortages you're going to have, and wages are not going to be able to keep up with the cost of living.
No.
So what are you going to do to offset that with limited resources? So there are things that you can do even if you are just short of things. Silver, canned food, all these things are required to at least give you some, some ammunition to begin to deal with the situation, or at least you have some options. Because you're going to find out the dollar is even though it's in relationship to other currencies, it's very high. But as far as the purchasing power is going, it's in the toilet almost, and it'll probably continue. as prices begin to rage, and there's only about 3 or 4 things that you can do is gold, silver, and base metals that they're going to have to need to continue to expand the economy. And if you don't have any type of investments in them, you're gonna have serious problems. I mean, serious problems. And the government, the problem is the government is not going to be able to meet this. And then the solutions they are coming up with modern monetary theory, that's sheer cuckoo theory.
Well, it would be okay if you didn't have the Federal Reserve running it. I'm all for social credit if the purpose is to meet the needs. But you know, there's a lot, and I hope we get into this at the conference, because there's a lot, in my opinion, at least, Lee, there's a lot of misinformation out there about these central bank digital currencies, what they are and what they aren't. The social credit scheme like you have in China is a terrible totalitarian thing. Yet one of the things that would save our country and others individually would be an honest Christian-based social credit system. Get rid of the Federal Reserve, get them out of the equation, and make sure that the monetary system is first and foremost to meet the needs of people rather than the needs of capital. But you know, I'm preaching to the choir here. You know, what can people do in their local neighborhoods? I mean, aren't you an advocate also of local currencies, local co-ops, and things like that to bring as much control of our lives back down to your own, literally your own neighborhood?
Yeah, that has been demonstrated up in New York. That was called what's the name of that money? I can't think of the money.
Ithaca hours.
Yeah, it's exactly. Those types of things are going to have to come back, because you're going to have some form of local currency and credit to deal with such certain situations. Even here in Chicago, to deal with certain neighborhoods and stuff, the city has social credits to try to deal with those types of. There's nothing wrong with social credits. I mean, they've been working for the last 400 or 500 years. Certain types of dams and huge construction were done with social credit. So it's not like you're going to borrow money out of nothing and charge interest on it now. See, that's the problem.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we're not going to see anytime soon that the Fed is going to be taken out of the equation, certainly not voluntarily, not by any act of Congress, because Congress and Senate and everybody like that doesn't have sense enough to know that even those calling for more public spending, the Fed is in their way, and they just don't get that. So, you know, we're going to have to do a lot of things to fend for ourselves, fend for our own families and communities. And, you know, the way that we marry that approach, I think, Lee, with what is going on in the world, you know, with the data points, with higher inflation, with supply chain issues. I mean, we're not going to suffer it as bad in the US by all appearances, but in some countries, especially in Africa, that are very disproportionately dependent on the Ukraine for their food, there's going to be starvation and riots this year.
That's correct. There's only about 5 or 6 countries, Russia, Brazil, that's like I think I got 3. Those nations are almost self-sufficient,
right,
in terms of food and basic materials that we need.
Yeah. Well, we certainly aren't in that position. We could be.
Right, we could be.
And we're going to talk an awful lot about. We're going to talk an awful lot about that at the show too. Any parting words of wisdom for now, Lee, before we sign off?
My parting words is people should begin to be able to psychologically pray for guidance, and most important is be able to kind of prepare for what's coming and discern that we're in a commodity boom. There's a shortage of these things. There's a shortage of oil, and compared to what you have in terms of demand. And even though China with their problems, and very simply, when Biden came in office, the first thing he did, he cut the pipeline, and that was reducing supply. There's a lot of supplies available, but over the years, there has not been the investment that we needed to come forth.
Right.
And that's throughout the world. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a total neglect of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And energy
Well,
is something that you absolutely have to need. You can't do anything without energy. I don't care
right.
what it is. You need energy.
Yeah. And we are in, one of the themes at the conference here again is going to be what I've long been terming now for many months, the new energy crisis. We're in a new energy crisis. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better because policymakers have simply not kept up with things. And it's scandalous. And you wonder sometimes, Lee, if the people that are in charge are just that stupid or just that corrupt. And we're designed to have these crises because there are people who benefit from them. Makes you think.
That's correct.
Yeah, makes you think. Well, hey, look, Dr. Lee Warren again. Check out your website. Tell us again is what? How do folks find you?
That's P.L.I.M, P.L.I.M, the number 2.org. P.L.I.M,
Okay.
P.L.I.M, the number 2.org.
I encourage you to visit them. I encourage you to visit them, folks, and of course to visit all of us on the 6th and 7th of May at the Lincolnshire Marriott. If you've not signed up already, do so. Here's the logo and website on the screen again. If you can't make it in person, sign up anyway. It'll give you access to the companies that we have, the program, and our two great panel discussions. And Dr. Warren will be with us on the Friday night panel as he has been for some time. So Lee, thanks again. All of our love to Penny, and I look forward to seeing both of you.
Thank you very much. You take care. Be blessed.
Yeah.